I'm Heather Smith and welcome to the Accounting Apps podcast, exploring the accounting and business apps community. Today I'm sharing with you the second debate I recorded from the Festival of Accountants and Bookkeepers in Birmingham in March 2024. The debate topic is Excel versus software. This is the last in the series of 3 podcasts from the festival, which was hosted by the brilliant people from the UK premier online accounting news publication, accountingweb.co.uk. Let me take a moment to thank Mike Goldsmith, Sarah Rafferty, Richard Hattersley and Tom Herbert, who were all immensely supportive of me joining their festival and who welcomed me with open arms. It was certainly a career highlight to be part of the festival, to speak at it and to connect with so many fabulous people in our community. If you're listening in and interested in attending a conference, but like many in our profession, a tad introverted and overwhelmed by the thought of that, then if I were you, I'd consider adding Festival of Accountants and Bookkeepers to your calendar. It has all the quality and content you'd find at a big, overwhelming conference with the vibe of a community-focused, charming country town fete or festival. On to the debate. This debate was on Excel versus software, and I was supposed to battle John Toon. However, I rather cheekily invited the titan of the software world, Michael Wood, to replace me, as I thought it would be more interesting debate for the audience. I call this edutaining. Michael Wood is the co-founder of Receipt Bank, which is now called Dext, and is now the founder of the new multi-entity solution Translucent. Earlier in the week, I had a conversation with Michael and I'd realised it was a topic he was quite passionate about. So, as I mentioned, I swapped him in for myself and I moderated the session. It's a really thought-provoking debate, and as I suspected, Michael brought a lot more to the conversation than I possibly could have. And honestly, if I'd have gone up against John Toon, I'd have probably lost. But please, don't anyone tell him I said that, okay? Listening back, I realised John Toon did not mention a few of the many hats that he wears. He is the tech strategy lead at Beaver and Struthers. He has launched a community called the Digital Disruptors, which you can pop over and join online. And he is the co-host of the DigiTools in a Cruel World podcast. So I encourage you to pause and go and subscribe to his podcast right now. So it's DigiTools in a Cruel, so that's one word, ACCRUAL, a Cruel World. And then come back and listen to the Excel versus software debate. So let's talk about the audio. Unfortunately, there's a bit of background noise and I apologise. If you can persevere with it, I think the content is riveting and worthwhile. And as you are listening, I encourage you to think about what your argument would be and what your rebuttal would be and who or which side should have won. Please reach out to any of us and tell us. As always, I encourage you to stay up to date with the curated content I'm sharing by signing up for the Accounting Apps newsletter available at heathersmithau.com and joining the Accounting Apps Mastermind group.
Have we got to sit? Is it got to like full boy band?
You
like
can do
look?
whatever you want.
I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna walk off.
I'm going to do a Donald Trump and just intimidate.
Yeah, good, Heather. If John starts to make a good point, just step in front of him.
It's like you're really getting my face. You'll be like, oh, this is really weird.
So we've got 1 minute to go for this debate to start happening. So you can, if you've already made up your mind and your decision is software, just open up the app and vote right now.
Outrageous. Ooh.
So welcome. Today we are having a debate on Excel versus software. My name is Heather Smith and I'm obviously one of the contenders in this debate. I've come from Australia. I've been in practice about 20 years now. I've written about 10 books and very much focused on the accounting and apps community. My position on this debate is software. Software is easily the winner, and in this debate there are no rules. So I brought in Michael Wood to help me with the debate. So, would you like to just briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you, Heather. My name's Michael Wood. Previously, I founded Receipt Bank, now known as Dext, and more recently, I founded Translucent, which is probably less known to you all, is all about helping groups of companies, multi-entity businesses, basically those clients that are larger than a sort of typical zero org, and that's what we do.
Fabulous. What a fabulous introduction. So you can see I'm just very excited to have Michael here because visionary, massive brain in this space, massive achievements, and we've clearly got the software side. So you can open up the app, vote, and but we are versing Mr. John Toon.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all here. And hopefully, with an audience of accountants, this is a foregone conclusion, right? Because Excel is our tool of choice, irrespective of everything else. And actually, if you're not quite sure about it, Excel is actually software. So, it's kind of like a fait accompli this, because I've won no matter what. So there you go. I work in a firm. I look after technology strategy for our firm, and I'm part of Heather's social groups on Facebook, etc. And
for the time being.
I also work with people like Michael and other apps, to try and either get them into our business and to make us work more effectively, or work with others to manage their businesses more effectively. So I'm here to talk about Excel, but I am completely across the technology space.
So for our opening remarks, would you like to tell me what our opening remarks are?
Cool. So positioning Excel versus software is an interesting positioning sort of straight away, and not just because John's point, Excel obviously is software. Excel has changed the world. It has been and is an unbelievable product. It is the only software product that gave everyone, school children, professionals, everyone sort of in between, the ability to structure data without being any sort of computer science background. So it's had this incredible impact and is this amazing, amazing tool. So I don't think it'd be too dramatic to say Excel probably shows up in the GDP stats over the past sort of 40 years, the difference it's made. It is so good. So I'm definitely not coming here as someone to knock Excel. But when it's positioned against software, when Heather sort of mentioned this to me, the thing that sort of sprung to mind is, of course, what Excel is so good at is when you're working on something by yourself and trying to structure your own data. And the analogy, given that we've got the sort of knitting and sewing expo next door, is Excel, even if you're amazing at knitting and sewing, you're unlikely to take your own creation as your wedding dress or your suit for your wedding. You still go out and buy something. And why do you do that? Because actually, as much as creating your own thing is enjoyable, as much as you can do amazing things to create yourself, you can do amazing things creating yourself, there comes a time for certain tasks that an extra level of professionalism is required. And I think that's where software is important in this debate, because of course software gives you that extra structure, it gives you that data model, it gives you that auditability, it gives you that ability for the UX or the UI that other people can jump in. Like, I'm sure I'm not the only one here who has nothing is more cringeworthy than trying to inherit someone else's Excel model that, they tell you they've spent, weeks on. It's like, it's a truly awful thing. Whereas actually jumping into someone else's Zero file or any other software package is all done because it's designed for more than one person. So I would come into this, my opening statement saying, I love Excel. I think Excel's amazing. Excel's particularly amazing at that single person work where you're trying to solve a problem or get to an answer or a number yourself. But when you're trying to build a business or trying to build a process that'll be used for more than one person, software is the clear winner, John.
Oh well, you think that, Michael? Right? let's see. I mean, it's interesting to see what Michael says about that problem and that challenge around inheriting an Excel model from someone else, and I do agree with him. I mean, I see that all the time. I see the challenges that presents. But actually, that's not Excel's fault. That's your fault. That's the user's fault, because we are in general terrible users of Excel. We take software from vendors like Michael and from Xero, etc., because it is built, it's structured, it's all kind of pre-done for us, and we go through a series of training courses, certification, etc., and everything else, and yet we don't give a second thought to doing any of that with Excel. I bet most people in the audience here are Excel users through and through, and daily users probably, but I also bet that a vast majority of you have never been on an Excel training course at all, maybe done a little bit of training, that might have been at school or college or briefly online. But most of the time, we get to a point where we're like, oh, I can't do that. Just go on Google. How do I do this formula, or how do I create a table, or whatever it is? And that's not really constructive learning. And that's why we end up with these problems. We end up with these problems with these models which aren't complete. We don't know how to audit Excel effectively. We don't know how to check and verify the formula are correct, that the table structures are being used appropriately and things like that. That's not Excel's fault. Excel is probably the most functional piece of software out there that you will use, with tons and tons of features, so many so that I can't think of anyone really that is fully capable of using all of them. But the onus is on us to be more effective, better users of software. In the same way that if you use Xero or Sage or whatever it is, and you only use 1% of the functionality, and you're still entering invoices onto those things manually and not using a Dext or an auto entry, for example, then why are you doing that? Why are you being ineffective and inefficient user? It's because of a lack of knowledge and understanding. So I think for me, it's a little bit lazy to say software trumps Excel just because of its usability. Yes, it does, but it does because the software houses make it easier for us as users to adapt to that technology.
Well, I note I was called lazy. That was definitely, and I noted that. Not saying it's untrue. I just noted it. So I think what I'd like to do is to slightly just sort of think of the question we're trying to answer, because we're both coming in saying actually software has its uses and Excel has its uses, and I think where then the disagreement comes is like, okay, well, where and when? And I would still posit no matter how many hours training, it would not be a good use of time in any way to, let's say, replace a GL with Excel. If you're running a practice, I'm not saying you can't, I'm saying it wouldn't be a good idea.
But then I guess the flip side of that, right, is that you've got a small client, they have 10, 20 transactions a month, they don't want to pay £20 a month for a Xero subscription, and okay, there is a cost to Excel, but it's a sunk cost because we ignore it. And you can replace that GL and effectively create a set of accounts from Excel at next to no cost, at reasonably high level of efficiency for a competent user, which would be equivalent to using something like Xero. So I do agree with that. I think one of the things is, and this comes back to probably the wider debate, is that if you ever use some of the short-term cash flow forecasting apps, or even if you've used some of the more complex three-way forecasting apps, almost invariably you end up falling back on Excel because you either don't get the answers you want, or it doesn't quite work in the way that you want it to. And that for me is probably where this debate is most relevant. Is like, there are software solutions out there that propose to solve a problem that either maybe doesn't exist or does exist, but don't actually solve the problem itself. They just give you a shiny wrapper around something that they want to sell you for £15 a month, and you sign up to it, and then 6 months later you realise it's not working. And so we revert back to Excel.
So can I jump in? Because I would absolutely agree with that. There's a number of software vendors out there, and I think forecasting is maybe the best place to focus on. That has been too ambitious. And I know I've looked at that space for a decade of, seen software vendors make big claims about here's our forecasting software, and I'm thinking, well, most clients' problems are actually the present. We haven't solved the present yet. to be sort of saying the software can forecast the future. So I would definitely agree. There's a number of vendors that have been over ambitious in where software can replace Excel.
It's very, very polite, that is. Not over ambitious. Like just plain bullshit.
Fine. I've never been in the forecasting game. And indeed, at Translucent, we deliberately, one of the first apps we built was an integration with Google Sheets and Excel, knowing that actually for a number of tasks, it makes much more sense to harness the power of Excel or Google Sheets rather than trying to do it as software.
Does that mean I can go now?
No. This is the sort of I tempt you in and then slam if this is on wrestling. The bit I'd sort of pull back is you mentioned that client coming in with 20 items, and you mentioned Excel being a sunk cost. I actually think that's a really bad example of when to use Excel, because in my experience, and I've got to be, John has got infinitely more experience of running a firm than I do, and I mean infinitely more, not a little bit more, like infinitely more. But where my experience comes is I've spent a lot of time around the world speaking to different firms. I spent a lot of time in Australia. When I first met Heather, I spent a lot of time in New Zealand, Canada, America. So I've spoken to firms all around the world and spent a lot of time chatting to them about how they work. And it was really funny. It became really obvious in the first few years, the fastest growing and most profitable firms are the ones that say no to clients the most. So the more restrictive their service is, the better the practice is. Now that can be type of client, it can be software the client uses, and I know it's incredibly difficult for any firm to be, let's say they specialise in farmers or vets, it's like, I'm actually only going to deal with vets, I'm never going to accept another client that comes in the door. That's really tough to do. And it's also tough to be, if you don't use our exact software, we're not serving you. Again, super tough conversation. I'm not underestimating how tough that is. All I've observed is over the years, having observed literally thousands of firms, the more that firms say no, the more profitable they are and the faster they grow. So as hard as that conversation is, the dividends are there. And so what worries me about the idea of actually John's answer, if you could use Excel for GL, because of course it is true you could, is actually what's then happening is you're deviating your own processes and you incur all these new and hidden costs. Whereas the firms that I see that are most successful, and I don't mean big by successful, they can be small and highly profitable, they can be part-time, or they can be large and sort of industrial, but it is restricting choice and sort of saying, actually, we've built workflows and this is how we work. And the more that one uses Excel rather than software, the more one is stepping away from that template.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. And,
should we stop there then?
I totally agree with you in terms of where software plays a role with accounting practices in terms of becoming more efficient, more effective, being able to engage with clients more effectively. That's definitely there. It definitely has a role to play. But the irony is, irrespective of all the software that you've got, I don't know any practice that can get away with getting rid of Excel or Google Sheets. It's always still there. It's still prevalent in the background. And my example was a little bit lazy, but it was really just to make the point of, there's always an alternative use for Excel. And I think, again, I come back to the fact that as users, sometimes we're just not very good in terms of maximising the benefit of Excel. We tend to abuse Excel and we use it for the things that it shouldn't be used for. So let me give you a real world example of what's happening in my practice at the moment, which is driving me completely up the wall. We have 4 offices, and in one office we're using Excel to book desk space because we're hot desk. And I'm like, that is completely inappropriate. Excel is not there for booking a desk in an office. It is there for analysing data, it's there for doing complex sums, it's for presenting data in interesting ways. It is absolutely fundamentally not for John wants to use a desk at 9 a.m. in Manchester on Monday morning. That's completely bonkers. but we go out of our way to abuse Excel in this way, and then wonder why we get frustrated because it's not particularly functional. And we partly do that because the software world is so complex and so challenging that sometimes as users, as consumers of software, we just don't know where to jump off. We don't know where to start in terms of looking out in the space. There have been lots of talks over the last few years around sort of this feeling of overwhelm around apps and things like that. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that's apathy. I think people are just generally lazy and don't want to go looking. But I understand why people feel like that, and that means that people tend to revert back to using something like Excel where it's maybe not appropriate.
Can I just jump in on one point there, Joe? Because obviously so I founded Receipt Bank in 2010, and we sold that business in 2021. It became Dex 2021 as well. And so I was at the beginning of this sort of cloud explosion and sort of all the different apps that exist. And it was an incredibly exciting time for the first 5 years because there were all these big problems to be solved and sort of apps to create. But the reason I came out of retirement to found Translucent was the exact opposite problem. I do think there are far, far too many apps out there in the ecosystem. And the problem with all these different apps is they have different data models, they have different pricing structures, they don't talk to each other, they use different definitions. And so the reason I founded Translucent was deliberately to bring that back, say actually all your apps in one place. Now multi-entity or groups or franchises, that's the first problem we're solving. But I'm building this business to bring it all back together. So I totally recognise the problem you're saying of we have all these different apps and it is causing problems. And the number of times Excel is now being reused as an interface between apps, which is complete insanity. And that is literally why I've come out of retirement, and you can question my sanity for coming out of retirement, but that's why I've done it, is because I do feel there's a huge problem to be solved in bringing the apps back together. The adjacent point I'd make is, and my numbers are a little out of date, so I apologise if the numbers aren't quite right, but back in the day, it used to be a firm would sell for 1 times revenue. That used to be the old sort of thing, you build up your practice and you can sell it for 1 times revenue. And by around 2014-15, that was slipping to about 0.7, 0.8. But what was also happening is the cloud forward firms and the software forward firms were diverging from the pack. And you were seeing actually some people getting multiples of 3 times revenue and things like that. Now, as I say, I don't know where those divergent numbers are at today, but I know that divergence still exists. I know if an acquirer comes across a practice that is heavily built on Excel and where a lot of workflows are based on Excel, they're instantly thinking this business requires more manual work, is less valuable, whereas a business that has moved more of their workflows to software is less dependent on the founder and therefore is more valuable. And so I guess that would be my closing remarks, if I'm not premature in timing, of why I think software is better than Excel, because I think everyone here is they're building up their practice and at the end of the day wants to be well rewarded for that. And as useful as Excel is, I'd still completely accept John's point, no business is going to eradicate Excel anytime soon, if frankly in my lifetime. But the reason software is the winner is that's what's going to build a more valuable practice.
Do you have some closing remarks there, John?
I'm pretty sure I do, yeah.
I'm sorry we're out of time. But,
I would say, again, Michael makes a really good point. I mean, the fact is, if you run an efficient practice and efficient business, and surely it should be more profitable, and so someone is going to pay you more money for that than a less efficient, less profitable business. I mean, that's just basic economics. The irony is that the due diligence will all be done on spreadsheets. There won't be a piece of software used for that, and so it doesn't really matter whether you run a super efficient business or not in that respect. But sorry, that's being very glib. I guess I think for me, what we are starting to see, and I think Microsoft in particular were very slow to this, but Google are much more advanced in this, is actually they've realised the power of turning Excel into a product that interfaces with other software to be able to draw data down and do different things with it. Because again, there are limitations generally with a lot of the software that we're using in terms of its usability, its functionality, the way that we want to slice and dice the data or we do something with it. And in the bad old days, we used to export it into CSV and then we messed around with it and saved it somewhere and then lost it and then did it all again. Now, of course, with APIs, we can actually start to connect our products into Excel, Google Sheets, etc., and do more with it and enhance the software that we've got. So I actually still think where Excel is really relevant in today's day is that it's super functional. It's got masses of things that we can do at. If we're good users of Excel, if we educate ourselves how to use it appropriately, how to structure data effectively, and then leverage the technologies of interconnecting it with the softwares that we are using, it's a no-brainer. And that creates real opportunity for us. And I think that the last thing I would say on Michael's point is I actually disagree with him. I think we've got a long way to go in terms of the app ecosystem. If you look at CRM, the CRM ecosystems, which have been around for much longer than the accounting ecosystems, they're number 4,000 or 5,000 interconnected apps, webhooks, automations and things. Xero has circa 1,500 now, maybe, something like that. So if you kind of lay that over the side, we're only halfway through the app explosion that we potentially could have in finance. And so I think Excel is going to be here to stay forever for Michael's and my lifetime. I'm not quite sure who's older, but it doesn't really matter. Definitely me, yeah. I mean, he looks much younger, even if he is older than me.
I think I am older.
That's what money does, right? But I think we're always going to revert back to Excel. No matter what software we've got, which vendors we're using, Excel is going to be the fundamental cornerstone of our businesses.
It's been an absolute pleasure listening to your debate, and I know I'm encouraging you to do the voting in the app, but for quickness sake, who is on John's side? John Toon. Who's voting for John Toon?
Oh, come on.
And who's voting for Michael Wood and the software? Oh, a lot of people didn't vote.
Yeah. They're undecided.
Everyone needs their hand up here, okay? We've got to do
Wait a second, does that mean there's some paper ledger people here? Is that?
Hold on, let's separate the vendors off the one side.
Okay, because that was pretty even, and I need it not even, so I have a winner. Who's on Excel spreadsheet side? Okay. Who's on software side?
Oh, yeah.
I still think it was very, very, very even there. Thank you so much, John and Michael, for that debate. That was brilliant. Can I encourage you to head over to the taco truck and talk to Michael at his stand at Translucent?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heather.
And I'm sure you'll find John Toon on the yellow brick road.
Yeah.
In red.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
That was fabulous.
Oh, thanks, guys.
God, I'm so glad I had Michael to hand that off to.
No, I can't believe you cheated.
That was good fun, though.
No, there are no rules in Debate Club.
Thank you. Hey, Alex.
Hi. Great. That was really good.
That was good, John. That was good.
Fun, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, that was
Thank you,
fabulous. Fabulous.
How is it that you use Excel for hot desking?
Look, this is what happens in a big firm, right? Where people just go off on their own and go mad.
That was great.
Thank you to Michael Wood and John Toon for participating in that debate. Thank you to the organisers of the Festival of Accountants and Bookkeepers, and I hope I can find a way to get back in 2025. I've just one last story to share with you that happened during the festival. I met a man, and I cannot recall his name, but he'd said he'd been listening to the Accounting Apps podcast for years, and it had been instrumental in changing his career and the way he approached the accounting community. So thank you to all the guests who joined me on the podcast and who share their insights and who had a positive impact on that gentleman. It's always cup filling to attend events and hear people's stories. Keep up to date with the modern accounting technology landscape by subscribing to the Accounting Apps podcast, the Accounting Apps newsletter, and join the conversations happening in the Accounting Apps mastermind community. I'm your host, Heather Smith, and I'm pretty easy to find on all social media platforms. I look forward to connecting with you.